Hello, I'm Dr. John Coffey, Chair of the Management, Business, and IT Department, and Associate Professor of Hospitality and Tourism Management. Long before I became an educator, I was a child of Istanbul. City often described as chaotic. Yet to me, it's simply hope. In this interview series, I speak with people who both live in Istanbul and shapes its culture of travel landscape. Historians, guides, creators, educators, artists, and experts whose everyday lives intersect with the soul of the city. This project I titled Istanbul Unfolded, Lived, Loved, and Shared. It's part of students' learning initiative designed to explore Istanbul, not as a destination to visit, but as a place to experience throughout the eyes of the lives and the residents. My hope is that these conversations will not only contribute to enhancing Istanbul's brand as a destination, but also ignite a deeper passion to experience it fully. That's not a city for tourists, but for curious explorers. Today, my guest, Lisa Morrow, Australian-born author and travel writer, who has been living and calling Istanbul as a home. She has written 5 books on Turkey, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, BBC Travel, Fodor's, CNN Travel, World Nomads, The Smart Set, Hyperallergic, and elsewhere. So let's begin with welcoming her. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the invitation.
Lisa, in one breath, who are you and how long have you been living in Istanbul?
Hey, my name is Lisa Morrow. I am Australian, originally from Sydney, and I've now been living in Istanbul about a bit more than 15 years, but my connection starts much longer when I first travelled to the city, to the country as a backpacker in my 20s. I've also lived in other places such as Antalya and Kayseri in central Turkey, but Istanbul really is in my heart. It satisfies a lot of things in me, and I kind of think I'm like Yerli Yabanji. I'm sort of like a local foreigner now, not just a foreigner.
I see. Well, it's I know the Istanbul is very attractive, and especially Antalya is recently is becoming very attractive. But Kayseri is unique. Before we move to Istanbul, what would you like to say about Kayseri? How why Kayseri, and what happened to pick the Kayseri?
I have a long association with Gurame because in Cappadocia I spent time there, 2 months living in a small village helping in a pension, and I got to know local people. And one of them was a man who was a university professor who worked in a carpet shop in summers, and he offered me and my husband teaching jobs at a university there. So we lived in central Turkey and Kayseri for 2 years, and it's sort of like a provincial capital. There really wasn't much to do. Two cinemas, one big shopping centre, a Hilton no one could afford, no bars, picnics, hiking, eating with friends, spending time together. It's a very conservative place, and most people would say, Kayseri, you lived in Kayseri, because they're quite traditional. And apart from the one and only time I went into town wearing a knee-length skirt and went, right, I'll wear trousers from now because they're quite surprised. We had a lovely time because we had a lot of really nice students. I'd get the bus into town. The whole bus would stand up to give me a seat, and random boys would follow me to carry my shopping. So it was really because when I was there weren't many foreigners, so I was sort of this glamorous movie star woman with blue eyes, because I was the first foreigner a lot of people had ever met. So it was a lovely time. It's changed a lot now. It's a much bigger city, but it's still got, central Turkey still has a lot to offer in ways that Istanbul doesn't, because it's smaller and more connected.
Right. It's interestingly the carpets or teaching in Turkey is very similar things that I hear for a long time. But Kayseri was a little triggering, and
Yeah.
I have to say something else for Göreme, for Cappadocia too. It's a very unique place. Wherever I travel in the US, even outside of the US, there's always someone comes and asks about this place, and I actually love it and I'm proud of it. I've been Kayseri a few times. It is as Anatolia as you can get. It's really great city.
Yeah.
And let's go back to Istanbul. And why did you choose the Istanbul, and how has your relationship with the city evolved over the time?
Well, I didn't, how do I say, I didn't choose Istanbul. It sort of chose me. When I first came to Istanbul, I was doing the big trip from Australia, which you do because it's such a long way. And I ended up in Istanbul by chance. I met up with a girl from Melbourne and we hitchhiked through the UK. And she said, I'm going to Greece. I said, great, I'll come. We island hopped and then we ended up in Istanbul just when the Gulf War had broken out. So it was a really dramatic time. You know, the world was worried about a third world war. There were US warships in the Sea of Marmara. And I just loved Istanbul. It was so dynamic. There were people everywhere, noise, chaos, but also really intimate moments. People wanted to know who you were. Historically, it's absolutely fascinating, and it continues to develop because I love to say that Turkey is littered with archaeology, but it is. They decided to build a new tram line, and they were delayed in one of the stations because they found a Byzantine church. My local area, Kadıköy, the big station, Haydarpaşa, they're relaying the lines, and that's taken years because they discovered the very first archaeological site, the very first settlement of this side of Istanbul. Um, and so I kept going back to Australia, and I would have these images in my head of Istanbul. And a lot of them were about my friends who I'd met, and crazy days where you get someone to say, "Oh, you want to eat fish." So you get in the car and you drive the other side across the bridge, go up to Bebek or somewhere to this little place to eat fish by the water. Or someone would say, "You say you like you like lokum, Turkish delight. I know the best place." When I go charging off to have lokum. Long summer nights where you'd meet people for tea after work, dinner with another group, and then someone would text. Very early days of brick-like mobile phones, but text and say, "We're having coffee at Moda. It's a full moon. Do you want to come and watch?" And you wouldn't get home till 2 in the morning, and everyone had to be up early, but that was what we did. And the more I traveled back and forth, the more friends I had in Istanbul, and the more I felt comfortable. When I'd go back to Australia, the sorts of questions people ask for, do you have to wear a headscarf, and do you have to convert, and is it very Muslim? And their perception of my world in Istanbul was completely different from what it was then, and even what it is today.
It's ironically, I get the similar questions, and people ask me about camels a lot, which I have.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
usually tell them, yes, I have seen ones in the zoo, but that's all right. But it's interesting you mentioned that. I hear a lot of people, they want to stop over in Istanbul. They want to go through like Greece. They want to go somewhere else and stop in Istanbul. And you mentioned about the history of the Istanbul and archaeology. I actually studied archaeology in Istanbul University.
Mm.
And what I call, a lot of people call Istanbul as a bridge from east to west, but I call it as a trap. So, which is a lot of cultures, a lot of people, they actually want to just go through, use the bridge to go somewhere else. And a lot of people,
Mm.
like your example, they stay. And it's kind of trap for many cultures. It's kind of crossroads. Literally, it's a crossroad. Uh,
Mm. Mm.
you really
I
clear.
was just going to say,
Yes.
sorry. I was just going to say, when people say it's a bridge between east and west, that's such a stereotypical trope. It's a very simplistic perception, because Istanbul is much more complicated than that. I mean, geographically, yes, it's split, but to describe it in such a way is to overlook the subtle things that connect people from different cultures, from different religious intensities, from different traditions. Because just because two people are Turkish, they could have totally different educational backgrounds. Someone will say, "I'm from Istanbul," and then you say, "Well, where's your memleket, your hometown?" And they'll say, "Oh, my family come from the Balkans," and they mean 4 generations ago or something like that. So it's a very rich cultural mix, and it deserves more acknowledgement, I think, rather than just compartmentalizing it into easy sound bites, if you like, of culture.
Right. It's interestingly, I hear that a lot. And usually there's a saying in Istanbul, if you ask someone, where are you from? Everybody says I'm from Istanbul. Everybody, even they just
Mm.
moved like a year ago. And but interestingly, we ask the next question, like, where are you from? And they say, like, I'm from Istanbul. And the next question we usually ask, where's your grandfather from? And like, and
Mm,
typically majority of the people, their grandfather is somewhere else. I have to admit,
mhm,
mine too. My grandfather, my grandfather is from Thessaloniki, from Greece, and
mhm.
they came to Istanbul 100 years ago with the population exchange from Thessaloniki to Greece. They called it home. They love Greece, but they also called Istanbul. Even my grandfather called it like a home. My father was born, my mother
Yeah.
was born. I was born in Istanbul, and I lived such a long time in the United States. I still call it home, and it is what it is.
Yes.
You really clearly explained it, but just to make it most simple way, maybe most unique way, I know you have that talent that explain my students here most simple way, because in their mind, Istanbul is bridge. We just mentioned that, and in
Mhm,
their mind, there is something about Istanbul that mostly like Oriental about Istanbul, which I don't see that way. Because if someone they
mhm.
ask me. How is Istanbul? And I usually tell my American friends, it's like New York. That's what I say. It's like the most simple way you can understand. It's New York. It's
Mhm.
like a New York of Istanbul. How would you put this in a most simple way? What is Istanbul to you, um, in a simple words?
All right. I'll start by saying what it's not. People make the mistake that because it's a Muslim country and that Istanbul is the capital of sort of Ottoman history, they tend to say, oh, it's a very Middle Eastern country. And then other people say, oh, but that's on the European side of Istanbul, so it's a European country. But the thing particularly about Istanbul is those things mix to create something very, very different that it's very hard to define, but it's neither Middle Eastern nor European. It's very Turkish. And Istanbul sort of reflects that. It's this very modern, dynamic city. Like people don't realize, but grandmothers FaceTime. Everyone uses technology to communicate with one another while celebrating things like Sheka Bayram, where at the end of the fasting month, where you give out sweets and candies to children and things, and children kiss their grandmother's hands while playing on a phone, sort of thing. So while it's this very modern, dynamic city, it's steeped in tradition, and traditions are very important, but they kind of mix with development and change to create some sort of quite fabulous, dynamic, innovative things. So the days here are ordered very equally by the call to prayer, because even where I live, there aren't a huge amount of mosques, but there are enough, and I will hear them, or I will see the tailor across the road, lovely man who prays 5 times a day. So you might go in to talk to him; he's out the back praying, so you just come back later. So that's one way of understanding the time. But the other one is the ferries and public transport can be packed with commuters during peak hour. And so you get some sense of beginnings and ends. But there's always time in between to chat to someone. I'm friends with, we have cuppages, they're like janitors, and I've known them for a long time. So I might chat with one, or I talk to the man where I get my travel card topped up. I know all about his rather lazy son who needs to study harder and his very ambitious daughter. Um, or you help a stranger. I look very Irish, Anglo-Saxon, but because my hair, makeup is everything is Turkish, I get asked directions all the time these days. No one even blinks. They don't think, oh, foreign, she won't know. And then there's always time to enjoy a glass of tea. I mean, once I was out and I got an email and I urgently had to send something, so I went to a stationery store, and they were quite surprised. Foreign woman speaks Turkish. And they arranged, I said I needed something printed out, signed, scanned, can we, and then sent. No problem. Would I like tea? Oh, yes, of course I love tea. And in your own country, this would never happen. Random people do not offer you tea in their shop. But this is what Istanbul is. So, like I say, it's very modern, very dynamic, but there are traditions, and those traditions are very much part and parcel of your everyday.
Right. Well, I always say that the tea is just part of the welcome, and something I tell the people, like, tea is very special in Turkey. It's more than like offering a tea. It's like it's a message for us. It means like, you are cared here. Like, we care about you. So it's more than a cup of tea. It's a cup of message, I believe, just to welcome the people. And You wouldn't be surprised, in my experience, you wouldn't be surprised. It might be even a lunch, like in most of the time they ask like, "Are you hungry?" Like, and that's very unique to me. And what I am hearing from the people about Istanbul, um, they exactly feel like the way you explain it. Like it's almost like something different than Istanbul. It's like something different than home. That's usually what they explain about Istanbul. And there are many students that I have. They really want to come to Istanbul. They would like to see the Istanbul, and they usually ask me, is there a single book? Is there a single movie, like a piece of music or something that I should read and experience before I arrive to Istanbul? I know it's extremely difficult to put Istanbul in one song or one book, but at least besides your books, of course,
Thank you.
what else would you recommend the students like, or instead of one, like a few, like what type of music, what type of culture, what they should learn before come to Istanbul,
I'm a big reader because music's very evocative emotionally, but reading opens you up to differences and to the possibility of thinking in a different way and imagining things. And I've read a lot of Turkish writers, and there aren't enough of them in translation, and my Turkish is not good enough to read the ones I really want to. But I still go back to Orhan Pamuk's Istanbul Memories of a City because it's like someone's written a love story, a love letter to someone. But in this case, the love of his life is Istanbul, and his Istanbul and the way I see Istanbul, it's got this very elusive quality that people are always trying to understand it and describe it. This is Istanbul, and this is specifically what you'll find and see and feel. But there's always something out of reach. And Istanbul is as much a mood as it is a place. And it's an ever-changing place. Unfortunately, at the moment, that's because of a lot of construction. But even without the construction, it's always transforming. And in Pamuk's book, he writes about growing up in the 60s and 70s when there are a lot of yalis and konaks, like wonderful grand old houses, and they were on large blocks of land. And unfortunately, they would mysteriously burn in the night and be redeveloped as apartment blocks. And so I will meet people and they say to me, maalesef Istanbul bitmiş. Unfortunately, Istanbul is dead. But it's not, because the minute Istanbul dies, it instantly evolves and grows into something else. And for me, Istanbul Memories of the City capture that. It's a bit like Aragula, the Turkish photographer. He
Mhm.
said that the moment you capture an image of Istanbul, something like that moment is gone. So it's already the past, reminiscing nostalgia. And so to me, that book and Aragula's photos really capture that elusive, fleeting sense of Istanbul. Like, I mean, it's a big, solid city. There's nearly 20 million people really live here, but you can never quite put your finger on it. Like if you love it like I do, you can never quite explain to someone why.
Well, our friends in Istanbul would love to hear about Orhan Pamuk and would love to hear about Ara Güler. But interestingly, when I travel, I start to see more and more Turkish books all around the world. I was like a couple months ago, I was in Puerto Rico. I actually saw Orhan Pamuk's book, not only Orhan Pamuk's, but other authors too. It's such a
Mm.
proud for us, and I'm sure you know it. The Turkish people are they feel like they actually saw a brand in outside of the country if they see something from Turkish. Even
Yeah.
my son, I'll give you a little funny story. My son, when he was very little, now he's a senior at a college. He went to Istanbul for a couple of months, and he came back. He was in Boston, and he saw the Kennedy's statue.
Mm.
He started to run to Kennedy and with saying that here is Atatürk, here is Atatürk. And I said, no, he's not. So he thought it's something from Istanbul, right? But
Yeah.
I never forget that. No, it's not. It's his Kennedy, But
Yes. Yeah.
we kind of like to see something from us in different cities.
Mm.
But you mentioned that one of the questions, what Istanbul is not, that's how you started. And I hear a lot of things about Istanbul, and I call them misunderstanding. And I gave an example. especially when I was doing my PhD in Texas Tech University. I used to get a lot of questions about camels, and I used to tell them because they were asking me, "Oh, we thought that you guys still have the camels," and I used to tell them, "Well,
Mm.
I thought you guys still have the horses, but there's none over there."
Yes, cowboys.
So, what are the things that usually people misunderstand about Istanbul, or it's they have the wrong message, you know?
Well, I start by saying one of the reasons I understand that most people, visitors, when they come, they only see tourist areas like Sultanahmet, Taksim, and even Kadıköy, because in those areas most people speak English. Everything's pretty ordered. It may not seem it, but it is fairly ordered. And so that even the unfamiliar things like the mosques, underground systems, the way street markets are, where everyone's calling out things and offering discounts and stuff, all seem easy to understand. And because of that, people don't really see every day, which is life here is much like it is in their own countries, only it looks very different. And I'll give some examples. Rituals and food are very important. And so here, when someone dies, it's not unusual for the family to pay to have lokma, sort of round, doughy yumminess in syrup, distributed for free. And the tradition is called Harana Lokma Dokmek. And foreigners have a big thing like, why is it free? And the idea is that the more that the lokma is distributed, the greater the happiness. Also, people will pray, so the prayers will ease the suffering of the person going into heaven or wherever you believe they go. Um, and other things like they'll see someone who's covered and they'll immediately think they're very religious, but they won't recognize, for example, in Sultan Ahmed, when she's wearing all black and the husband's wearing shorts and Rolex, they're not from Turkey, they're from one of the Arab states.
Mhm.
Um, I have friends who will go drinking and dancing on a Sunday, but they won't drink on a Thursday night because Friday's the more religious night. So there's this sort of suggestion, this feeling that it's very easy to spot that everyone must be either super religious or a particular group is super religious. They go to the mosques and it's quite an experience. But like I mentioned, my tailor Hussein, he's very religious. He has a dent on his forehead from
Mhm.
praying on a concrete floor 5 times a day, probably for the last 60 years. And yet he's a little bit deaf. So we have these really merhaba screaming, but he knows that I'm foreign and my Turkish is a lot better, and he knows that I write, but he'll say, "What are you doing?" And I'll show him something I've written, for example, for CNN Travel, and he can't really conceive that my neighbor Lisa writes for this American magazine, and he just thinks it's great anyway. And we have a chat and we have a talk, and he offers me a tea, and so these are friendship, death, marriage, love, they're all very normal, but the way they play out here are very different. And you don't see that in Sultanahmet. It's like Sultanahmet is beautiful, but I kind of liken it a little bit to Disneyland because it's very manicured and it's very um, clean. And I don't mean that. I just mean there's no sort of chaos. There's none of the usual slight craziness of everyday life in Istanbul. And when people stay in Istanbul for a week, you'll get particularly women saying, "Oh, I love Istanbul. I want to move here." And it's like it's not quite like that, you know.
Well, I hear that a lot, and some reasons a lot of people I feel like it's discouraging. Like people, oh, Istanbul is not what you see. Um, I take it in a positive way. It's probably not what I see, but it's in a good way. It's really good way. And I know you speak Turkish, which is we love to hear people speak Turkish. I don't know why, but we love to hear you speak Turkish. And we love the accents. Saying that I have an accent in English and my children, they have an accent in Turkish. They're fluent in
Mm,
English, but because they were born here. But by looking at the Turkish culture and Turkish language, um, what are the things that you learned first, or what are the things that you use a lot in daily? Because people want to hear. Um, when I was in Istanbul University years and years ago, when I was at college, and I went to England for study abroad. I stayed an entire summer in North London, and I will tell
mm,
you that I learned a lot about Istanbul in London because I never not
mm.
that we have that cultural things. I'll give you one simple example. I used to have a golden chain. Funny, but I used
Hmm.
to have a golden chain when I was in London, and my friends' parents, they told me it looks great on you. And I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And they repeated, "We said we stepped on purpose on you." And I said, "What do you mean?" Because the Turks are so interesting. If they feel like you like it, they take it off and give it to
Yes,
you.
yes,
So
they'll give it to you.
I looked at them and I said, "You know what? I never thought about it, but we are like that. Like I never thought about it." So I learned my culture a lot when I was in London. So that's why I would
Yeah.
like to ask, in your views, what are the few words or a few things that in culturally is something that I can learn today, you know?
Well, there's these phrases that you use to connect with people, and Istanbul people, not so much now, but used to be very polite. Like Istanbul were people who go back generations living here, and there's all these standard phrases you can use to connect with people who may not be from the same background. You may not have anything in common, but it's this sort of like a etiquette dance. So, for example, if you go to a government office, um, you might say to the officer, "Kolay gelsin," and it basically means, may it go easy. But you're suggesting that you're concerned that their work is difficult, and you appreciate that, but you also want them to work hard for you. And when I used to go for residency, it was at the local police station, and I'd always go "Kolay gelsin," and they'd be like, "Oh, thank you very much." And another foreigner who'd be like a bit abrupt wouldn't get treated nearly as well because they weren't appreciated. And in our culture, it's like, well, you're a public servant, you should do your job. But it makes it, the more personal it is, the better things go. And the other one that I love in a way is Getchmish Olsen, which typically means may it pass, but it is used most often in sickness. But if someone could have a cold and you say Getchmish Olsen, or someone could say, my uncle's in intensive care, we don't know how he is, and you go Getchmish Olsen. And I kind of find the one thing's not so serious, one is terribly serious, but you're using the same phrase. But even when someone's having a tough time at work or problems in their personal life, you say "Get mich Olsen," which I think is kind of nice because you don't know what to say at times, and it shows the person that you've heard what they said and you're concerned. And the other one I particularly like is Afiyet Olsen, which is Turkish for bon appetit. And that not so much in upmarket restaurants, but when I used to work at universities and you had yemekhane where you'd all go to the dining room, if you finish your meal and someone's eating, you stand up and you say "Afiyet olsun." And now in smaller little lokantas, they're little restaurants where they might have doner kebab or they'll have cooked meals, and you choose. You'll say to someone "Afiyet olsun." It's a sort of, yes, we're all enjoying our food, and I hope you enjoy your food. And I love all that because there's nothing odd about saying it. Whereas in my country, if I said to a random stranger "Bon appetit," they'd be thinking, "Why is she talking to me?"
Well, it's interesting with these terms that you explained. That's something that I still struggle in the US because I feel um, there's no really exact word in English to tell them Afiyet olsun. I mean, I understand bon appetit, but some reasons I don't feel it's the same impact. Or kolay gelsin
Mm,
is some reasons I feel um, even if I say something here in the United States, I usually explain the culture. That's my culture. I would like to take it easy, like something like uh,
yeah,
they just try to understand what do you mean? And like, well, it's really hard for me to explain it, even
yeah.
it's very cultural things. And I will
Mm.
tell you, you mentioned that Istanbul has changed a lot, which I will ask you at the end to elaborate on it. But to give you the cultural things, the difference between my grandfather and myself, even our generations. My grandfather used to tell me when he was in Taksim, he was bilingual too. He was speaking Greek, Turkish, and his grandfather, my great grandfather, he was speaking English because he worked in the US. And they told me like when they were in Taksim almost 100 years ago, they bought a bucket, just an empty bucket, and they need to go to
Mm.
Karaköy. They walk from Taksim to Karaköy.
Hmm.
They couldn't figure out how to do it because they had a bucket. They thought it's not proper to walk in Istiklal Street with the bucket, you know.
Bucket, yeah.
Right, they because they thought it's rude, and he was telling me that story, and I was looking at him. What does that mean? You can't carry a bucket in Istiklal Street? And he said, "Well, it's shame on us. We can't do that, you know." I said, "We
Mm,
can't do that because everybody has suits like the papillons, like you know,
mhm.
we can't walk there with the bucket." So I said, "What did you do?" We had to return it, you know.
No.
That was the culture in Istanbul years and years ago.
Mm,
It
mm,
evolved a lot. And maybe in another time, I can tell you, even my time evolved a lot. And that's what
mm,
Istanbul is, that you really explained well. But let's go back to a subject that we can talk hours and hours, but I would like to hear a few things um, specific for the Istanbul, which is the food in Istanbul. And I hear that a lot.
mm.
And is there a specific one dish or one meal when I call Istanbul, or hopefully more than one, you know?
Well, it's going to sound very strange because Istanbul, as you probably know, is now has its own Michelin guide. But for me, yarım döner ekmek is Istanbul. Now, for people who don't know it, it's chicken doner on the spit, and they cut it, slice it thinly, and we'll have it on half a loaf of bread, or sometimes a tombik, which is like a round roll, which is really yummy. And they serve it with lettuce, white onion, tomato, chips, and turşu, which is little pickles. You can say no to some of those, but I just say everything. And it's this quintessential Istanbul dish. It's not very expensive. It's available almost everywhere, and the places where you eat it range from kind of you're at a bus station and you're desperately hungry because it's 3 in the morning, but there's something to eat. But I've eaten it at places where like little buffets down by the water in Karakoy, and you've got the water slapping against the wall, and in summer you can smell the salt from the sea. There'll be old men sitting in the sun, flicking their worry beads and drinking a tea. There's a lovely little buffet, tiny little place, but the view is up this street, which is really popular with Instagrammers because behind them is the Galata Tower.
I see.
Um, other places. My favourite buffet for a long time was down near the main post office at Eminönü. It's a wonderfully grand area with huge sort of Turkish nationalist architecture from, I'd say, the turn of the 20th century, some older. It's a little bit run down, but it's. I used to go there when there were no mobile phones, and you'd see desperately lonely soldiers queuing to ring home on the phones. And I used to chat to the waiter there, and his kids. We met when his children were 7, and now they're all grown with their own families. Or just places where when I go looking to research for writing or for my Istanbul guide, I might come across a little esnaf lokantası, which is like a working man's restaurant,
Mhm.
and they're always quite surprised to see a woman. And in the past, there used to be aile salonu, like family sections, but when I was with my husband, and now they're really boring because you're up in this room with no view. So I'd always sit, and eventually some old man would say, "Where are you from? And what are you doing here?" And they're the great leveler. The foods are really great, and sometimes there's a place in Karakoy which I always go when I'm shopping, and they've been there for 50 years. In this same little shop doing the same thing. And I like the constancy, but I also like the fact that no matter how upmarket the area or how run down the area, this is a food of Istanbul.
I see. I see. Well, it's interestingly you mentioned about the esnaf lokantası, and I had this similar experience here in the United States. There are a few cities, small towns in the US, heavily their residents are heavily Turkish. So you feel like you're in
Mm,
Turkey. And it's funny. It's one of them is very close to New York in New Jersey. It's a city called Patterson. Even their
mm,
mayor is Turkish. And interestingly, when I went there, I had the same feeling. The stores, like they were putting some signs in Turkish, like ekmek geldi. And
mm,
there were some signs with the ekmek, and there was a coffee store. So I want to visit that coffee store, like coffee, like. But in Turkey only males go. Like
mm,
I was
mm,
expecting that in the United States, and I had some guests from Turkey. They're writers, authors, so we had like 4 or 5 women in our group. So we went to coffee place. I just want to show them the place. We entered the place and everybody looked at us, the woman in the coffee place. And I said, well, I thought
Yeah.
this is New York, you know. But it was interesting. And another interesting thing was they were very custom for using the cash. They were not accepting the
Mm.
card even in the US, and I was surprised to see that. It was very unusual for me. Well, the beverage. When I say the beverage, um, we have beverage different than the rest of the world, but we also have beverage like other cultures, but we put them on a different meal. The tea is different in Turkey, coffee is different in Turkey, and we have
Mm.
other drinks. Um, what do you feel about them? Like not only tea, coffee, but other drinks too, you know?
Well, when winter comes, um, it's time to have salep. The ground orchid root drink, which is very sort of creamy and nutty with cinnamon, but it can't just be any salep because the packet ones are not genuine. And I love that you can be somewhere and it'll be freezing because Istanbul does get very cold. And there'll be a salep seller on the road, and they have these. I don't know the English for them or even the Turkish, but they have these sort of round vats with a conical top on them and a little tap, and they serve the salep from that. And it's just this lovely warming drink. And the other one, which I've drunk once, is called Bolza.
Mhm.
There's a place in Vefa called Vefa Bolzacısı, which is the most famous Bolza place in Istanbul, in a marvelous, marvelous cafe that they still has the original decoration and Iznik tiles, rather than like I don't like this. I mean, look, I don't mind sleek modern, but when you've got a traditional, you're known for something traditional. Don't upgrade your place to look like everywhere else. Keep it the same. And bolza is made from fermented barley and chickpeas, and it's odd. I mean, like they say some things are an acquired taste. I will not be acquiring that taste. It's too weird. But the funny thing is, at night, I live in an area that's been heavily developed, and I've lived in both the original apartment we bought and the new apartment. And before they started knocking everything down, we had the bolzage, bolza, and he'd come through at night, and that's what you would hear. It's like a song, and he's selling bolza very late at night. And I thought, oh, that's really lovely. How interesting. And then one of my friends told me that not only is bolza warming and nutritious, it's considered an aphrodisiac. So I'm sort of thinking, right, which of my neighbours are getting bolsa? And does anyone get bolsa? Because do they want their neighbours to know, sort of thing? And then yet other people would say, oh, no, you can't trust a bolsa from a street vendor. So there's all these different drinks, and they all have these fabulous sort of histories and stories, and just about everyone has an opinion on them. And I love that, because you can meet a complete stranger, and of course they ask you, what do you like and what's unusual. And the minute you mention something that they're passionate about, whether they love it or hate it, you're friends for life, and you don't stop talking for hours.
But the way I explain the boss, because my friends also ask here when they visit the Turkey,
Mm.
I try to describe the boss, and I tell them it's a grandfather of the beer. You know, like it's it's how everything
It's
started.
weird.
It's something like maybe before it become a beer, it was a boza. You know, I
Maybe.
it's completely different thing. But however, it's the same way they. By the way, I make boza here even in the United
Oh, do
States.
you?
Like I
Mm.
said, I worked in the culinary schools. I actually taught some of my students to do some of traditional Turkish foods, including boza,
Mm.
and it is very unique, and it has the same logic to make. It's a fermented drink. It's like any other,
Mm. Mm.
but it's very strange, even for coffee. And when I talk to my friends here, I tell them the coffee, the Turkish coffee. There must be an occasion for that. We don't really drink the coffee for like just every day, and we don't drink it like big cups or something. It's a small cup. There must be an occasion, and
Mm.
there's a story and culture in it, just behind of it. I think the coffee is very interesting too, as well as iron is another thing. Most of my friends don't like it, but Ayran is a different taste too, you know.
Yeah, but when you, for example, I drank ayran in Adana, no, Urfa, and but I ate Adana kebab, which is really really spicy, and Urfa is known for a fatty kebab, but it's a very hot place. And when you're eating really hot, spicy food in hot weather, ayran just really cools you down. I mean, I suppose it's an acquired taste, but you've got to try it at least once. Like, I don't. When I used to be a bit, oh, I don't know how things will be, but now I'm much more, I've got to at least try it, because even if I don't like it, I'll be able to say why I don't like it rather than just thinking, oh, I don't think so. Because I never used to like Iran, and I do now. I like, what else? Actually, no, I tend to like most things in terms of food, especially Turkish food.
Right. It's interestingly there is another thing that this is the dessert. It's a kind of pudding, and we call it like Noah's pudding is ashure. And
Yep, yep.
I actually served it in my restaurant in the United States in New Hampshire. And
Mm,
I used to make some traditional Turkish foods. And the difference of our restaurant, we used to give the history of the food. We used to tell them what the food is. I had guests coming to restaurant, and I used to tell them, I explained it. They listen the story and history, and I give them the flyers about the food to go and tell their friends.
mm,
And I always tell them Ashura is very different taste. There's a high chance that you're not gonna like it. And I usually buy them. I tell them I'll offer you one just to taste it because I want you to taste it.
mm,
You're not gonna like it. Interestingly, there were many, many guests, and especially there was one incident. She loved the story of Noah Arks and the whole thing
mm,
about pudding. She tasted it, she didn't like it, but the next day she
mm.
came back with friends. And she said, I
Yeah.
came for the story. She said, I didn't like it, but I want them to taste it and listen the story. So she did this
Mm.
the entire week because we did only 1 week. Every day she came with some other people just for the story. So it's
Yeah.
that's something that I use for my students. The customers will come if you create a story, even if they don't like the food. That's that's an interesting part of it. But when you are in Istanbul, it's probably it's different than any touristic places, but is there a specific place that you like to go just for a cup of tea or maybe listen a music or read a book or I had some friends in Istanbul. They told me different places, and they say they found a peace. Like, is there a specific place? It's very hard in Istanbul. It's very busy city, but I know there are some spots. That is there any spot that you can recommend and I can try when I arrive in a couple months?
Well, the thing is, if it's a place that holds meaning in my daily life, or like, because that's actually where I live. But I can say, if you like, what I like to do when I'm looking for inspiration is I very much like being on the water. I think a lot more clearly, and I also uh, find that if I'm surrounding myself by beautiful things and not really thinking about anything in particular, I'm much more inspired and refreshed. And so I might do something like I'll catch a ferry up to Beykoz, which is on the Asian side of the city. I live on the Asian side of the city, and Beykoz is further up the Bosphorus towards the Black Sea. And when you go up there, it's a funny little area because you sort of fall out of the ferry and you're onto the main road. But there are the most exquisite things there. There's a wonderful, wonderful old fountain from the 18th century, and then you wander past, of course, invariably men in flat caps, baggy pants, smoking, doing the worry beads and chatting. But there's also a Korosu, beautiful grove, which is now a big sort of forest that you can walk in. But originally it was someone's private garden, like one of the Sultan's gardens.
Right.
Um, and you can go there. And I also like Eyüp Sultan up on the Golden Horn because it's some people sort of say to me, what? Because it's very religious. It's actually the third holiest place. The Ayub Sultan Mosque, I think, is the third holiest place after Mecca and Medina. But it's where Turkish people go on pilgrimage, and it's beautiful. It lovely, huge mosque, wonderful old plane trees. Because people may not realize, but the great, huge plane trees, you might come across one in the middle of the street, were all planted to commemorate a battle, a birth of a child, or whatever, they're all protected, they're all listed and numbered and cared for every year. And so Ayop has this cross, you go from being Istanbul 21st century to Istanbul 19th century. There's Pierre Loti Cafe up the top, which has great views, but is far too commercial. It's Istanbul, we don't go there anymore because it's too many tourists. But you can wander around Ayop, and it's a marvelous place because there are wonderful old buildings and former libraries and imarets, which was like a soup kitchen. And don't go if you're squeamish, because they also have a kurban place when people go to kurban is when you sacrifice an animal to show your appreciation for your bounty, so that those who don't have will have food. But also you might have something sacrificed when maybe your mother was terribly ill in hospital and you prayed to Allah to save her, and he did, so you do an adak. And the meat from those things gets cooked in the soup kitchen and gets fed to the poor. And so while some things Westerners might find a bit confronting, it's the way really traditional life continues in a city that's developing and growing. And it's just really enormously peaceful because it's mainly low rise. There are beautiful mosque complexes. Ayub Sultan Mosque even has tash sorry, I can't remember the term for them, but they're stones. They're charity stones where people would leave money in the past. And if you go into a mosque, you might see a rather ugly looking box with a slit in it. And the idea is that you donate money to the mosque. So those are areas I really like to go because they're, particularly Ayub Sultan, it's so Turkish. It's such a beautiful place for Turkish people to go that I think foreigners feel almost like they're trespassing. But you get a real sense of the city, the city that it's alive, because that's where you'll see not only covered women, you'll see modern women, you'll see men, boys, all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds there, and it's a really good microcosm of what life is like in Istanbul.
Right, right. I agree with you. I'm actually the European side of the Istanbul, and um, I'm from Fatih, which is actually Constantinople, and especially for Eyüp is it's interestingly you are right. It's really Istanbul culture, and not only for Turkish background. There is also like you said, Pierlotti, like some remains from like the cultural remains from the French culture. You may find something from British
Mm-hmm.
culture. You will definitely find from the Greeks, and you will definitely find from the Armenians, and especially recently, more other cultures are getting in there. It's really combination. It sounds like a real Istanbul, and I also like the place. And when you are in Istanbul in general, this happens to me a lot, and many people mentions when they come back from Istanbul, um, they there's always a moment that they meet. It's unexpected. It's like something that they think they change their view. Usually, most of the time, it's a positive way. Most of the time, recently it has been happening to me more negative, but I love to hear more positive than the negatives. But is there a moment that is there a moment that really you thought in hospitality we call it's a moment of truth or wow moment that you think, wow, that's something different. Is there any moment that we can share today with our students?
Well, Istanbul is not a city that reveals itself so easily, so I can't say there's one wow moment.
Yeah.
But there are lots of small encounters that are really significant, and I'd like to mention two if I can. Um, in the past, when during Ramadan everyone fasts, and in the past they would fire a cannon across the Bosphorus to announce that it was time to eat.
Right.
And I was on a ferry once, and the ferry was, people were tired. It was winter, we were cold, and the old ferries were quite romantic, very Agatha Christie like, and they have heaters, so you're sort of sitting in the heat, just half asleep, and then the cannon fires. and this old lady and wearing shalwar, which are the traditional baggy pants, a hand knitted cardigan, and a scarf that I think she did the oya, the
Mhm.
decorations for herself, said to someone that was the time. It's iftar, and she pulls out this enormous round of pide bread and she breaks it off and she offers it to people. And I thought, that's so Istanbul, that generosity with food and the fact that various people took some, because even though she was very much possibly visiting from a village, I don't know, because she looked a lot like the village women I'd known in Kayseri and Güreme many years before. But young, fashionable, young girls took it and older women took it. And it was very much a moment where everyone was unified. And what it says to me is, you can't ever judge people by the way they look, and you can't sort of make assumptions about what you can unite people. And the other one was this bizarre kind of moment when all these things I know come together. And so I had gone to Izmir some years, I'm talking in the present now, some years ago to do some research about various events. And I had been reading about the Whittle family, who were a Levantine family, who were very, very wealthy and very influential in Izmir until 1923 and the population exchange. And I was back in Istanbul, and this is like about a year or two ago, and I had gone to the Haydarpaşa Cemetery because I was doing my final research for my Istanbul guide, Istanbul 50 Unsung Places, and that's one of the places. And the cemetery is enormous and quite lovely. You enter sort of like a little gate, and then you end up right down the other end by the water. And it was one of those early spring days. I think it was spring or it was early autumn. So it was warm, the sun, dappled sun. I'm in amongst trees and I'm sort of feeling like I could have a nap. And suddenly this gardener appears, and he was a big sort of burly man. And he says, "I'm terribly sorry, Hanım Effendi, but today is Arefe Günü and we're closing at lunchtime." And Arefe Günü is the half day before a public holiday, a religious day. And I was a bit disappointed. He said, "But, would you like me to give you a lift to the gate because it's a long way?" And he had a little golf cart. So we went driving along the golf cart. He wants to know who I am and what I'm doing. And I was saying how lovely the cemetery is. And I said it was really interesting because there was a great big gravestone for the Wittals. And I said how I knew about the Wittals from Izmir. And he told me all about, yes, he knows. He said that there was actually a very old lady who was a descendant of the Wittals, and she lives in Moda. And every year she'll call him to say, "I'm getting the taxi now, come and get me." And he would meet her at the gate and take her to the cemetery, because the cemetery has people who used to live in Istanbul, people who died in wars here from different countries. And only people, like no one can be buried there unless they have a familial connection. And because of the population exchange and various things, she doesn't have the paperwork to prove that she's connected. But I just thought it was amazing. Here I am in Istanbul, and this history from 100 years ago is alive because someone from that family lives here. And the fact that this gardener knows all that history was wonderful. And I find that I tend to speak to gardeners and security guards and janitors and stuff because they'll always know the history of the place they're working at. And I think that's quite wonderful.
That's actually tradition in Turkey. We tell the people if you visit some places, talk to people who works there, like gatekeepers,
Mm,
or they know a lot. They have a lot of stories.
mm,
I had this similar experience last year. Last year when I visited Sürmene Manastırı, it's like in Trabzon
mm,
monastery. There was a
mm,
gentleman. He was selling a candle. So I started to chat with him because my wife was in the she went to the restroom, so I was just chatting with the gentleman over there. He said he has been working there for 40 years, and he told me
mm,
some stories, and I said, I wish I would record you. This
mm,
is something you cannot find any book. And he was telling me in 40 years, different people, different culture, how they visit and how they behave. And I actually even asked, it's kind of funny part of it. I said, can I buy a candle? Because I want to go to inside and I just want to wish something and put it up. And he said,
mm,
"Are you Muslim?" I said, "Yes, but I just want to do it. I want to buy." And interestingly, he said, "Well, for us, we use our antennas." I said, "What is antennas?" "Your hands. You open it." it takes you
Yeah.
everywhere. Like you don't need a candle. And
Mm-hmm.
was telling me how cultural differences in different religions and different things. And he really put it nicely and with a funny way because he's from the Black Sea and he looks at the things with a different view, and I really enjoy to talk
Mm.
to gentlemen. So
Mm.
you write the travel books, right, about Istanbul and even though I teach travel, hospitality, and tourism, and I actually feel sorry to see on in TVs and YouTube's like, here's the here's the $10. We'll spend all day in Istanbul with the $10 or things like that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't like to see the things like, oh, I will show you everything about Istanbul in 24 hours. And
Yeah.
it really isn't a tourism for me. It really isn't a Istanbul for me. But I usually tell my students and viewers and friends, you don't have to see everything. See is
Mm.
that you feel the Istanbul. So if I have only one day, I know one day is like a second in Istanbul. And my friends, they ask me how many days I need to visit in Istanbul, how many days I need. And I usually tell them, you need a life. You need a life. It's not a day or two. But if you have only one day, especially it's very popular with the Turkish Airlines, there's a stopover 1 day, 2 days, 3 days.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
one day, what do you think they should at least, I don't want to say visit, they should experience?
Okay. Um, Even though it sounds stereotyped, you have to go to Sultanahmet because Istanbul, Constantinople, and various other names was originally the capital, well, was the second major capital of the Ottoman Empire and the most important one. And in Sultanahmet, in walking distance, easy walking distance, you can see Topkapı Palace, which is extraordinarily beautiful, where you'll see tiles and architecture and learn about history that you won't see elsewhere. There's also an underground system called the Yerebitan system, which is part of the water distribution system that starts in Belgrade Forest. And I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but it's hundreds of kilometres carrying water. And the thing about the Yerebitan system that is so fascinating is that um, I may have his name wrong, but Ogier de Busque was a Belgian ambassador to Istanbul in the 1500s, I think, and he wrote of going into houses on that part of the street because he heard that people were fishing from their basements, and that underground system was actually lost to knowledge. But people would fish, which I think is fabulous, fishing in your basement. And it's been done up, and it's quite an experience. It's not just about walking into history, it's a whole sort of experiential moment. People who like shopping should go to the Grand Bazaar, not so much because you'd be buying things, but because it's this extraordinary enclosed area that dates back about 500 years with more shops than you know what to do with, where there's one street just off the gold section where a handshake is a man's word, and basically the gold standard, the value of gold is set in that little tiny street. So it's really quite something special. Um, a lot of people go to the Hagia Sophia, and it's a very important mosque. However, if you are really keen on Byzantine mosaics, I would recommend Chora Church or Kaliye.
Mhm.
It's been recently renovated, and the mosaic work is extraordinary because, like, if you've never seen anything, you probably won't need to see any more after you see it because every surface is covered. The Hagia Sophia is a more important architectural work. However, and the mosaics and frescoes are really wonderful, but time has done its damage, and there's less to see. Whereas Chora is just mind blowing, really, and I don't use that lightly. Just you can't go in on Fridays because that's the most important prayer day, and it's closed to foreigners. What else? If you're there in winter, I would really recommend doing a hammam. A lot of them are open until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, so it's not like you have to take sightseeing time because it's not a spa treatment. A lot of people say, oh, I want to have a spa at a hammam. A hammam is, I went to one recently in a recently converted hammam. As I say, when I say recently, the owners bought it 15 years ago, thinking it would take a year to renovate, and it took 13 because they kept finding layer after layer after layer of history, including etchings in the cisterns that they believe were done by pirates, so sailors who'd been kidnapped by Barbarossa the pirate, sorry, or Ottoman colonel, whatever you want to call him. And so it's really wild. And you go there, and your Kesaji, your Nadir, the lady who does your washing and Kese, literally takes you by the hand. And it's like going back to childhood and being cocooned. It's beautiful. And you come out, your skin feels like soft like velvet. You feel like you've had a complete holiday, and that's only an hour and a half. So that's another thing. Um, if you could, like a lot of people head to Eminunu, you can get the tram down, and they do hour and a half boat trips up the Bosphorus. And for my money, for the time you spend, if it's summer, it's really hazy, so you can't really see well. Plus, you're just sailing past things without really knowing what they are. I would do something like either get a ferry up to Beykoz or around to Uskadar, and just wander, because Kadıköy is very fashionable, very hipster, but Uskadar is there's something like, actually I don't know how many mosques, but it's got wonderful architecture. It's got really good restaurants, and again, it's a bit like the Grand Bazaar and Eminönü and Sultanahmet all rolled into one, but with normal people, just ordinary residents rather than just tourists who are all desperately trying to get the best Instagram shot or selfie, etc. So yeah, one day is really difficult, but there's more than enough. And even people who aren't interested in history will be at places like the Grand Bazaar or the Yereban Sistine, or even going on the ferries, because the ferries have this long history, and they have musicians who play and sing songs. And some of the best memories I have is you'll be on the ferry, and on the right there's Leander's Tower, Kız Kalesi, the Maiden's Tower. Then suddenly everyone runs to the left, because there are dolphins and porpoises living in the Bosphorus and Sea of Marmara, and you'll see them. And then someone will be singing a song that everyone knows the words to, and they all sing along. So it's really magic.
Right. I mean, I agree all these places. I can put my signature over there. And I used to live in Hippodrome in Sultanahmet. My grandfather had a house,
Mm.
it's a hotel right now, and he had a couple of hotels in Turkey. And I worked in Four Seasons hotels in the center of between Blue Mosque and Saint Sophia. So I do
Mm-hmm.
exactly not every places you mentioned, but definitely Sultanahmet. I go there every year when I visit, and my friends actually makes fun of me, and they tell me they live in Istanbul and they are professors in Bosphorus University.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They tell me we haven't been in Sultanahmet last 5 years, and you come here every year. They may not go. It's a very crowded. It's very touristy. I understand that, but there's something different about this location.
Mm.
And my experience, like I said, when I was a student and when I was studying in archaeology in Istanbul University, and I was right after I finished that program, I started to work in um, Four Seasons hotels. And
Mm-hmm.
right after the first year, we were digging for garage right behind the Four Seasons hotels. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they were digging, but I was working there, and I learned that they found remains 9,000 years old. 9,000 years old.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't surprise me.
I was so impressed, and I didn't want to leave that area. And I said I want to see everything, because I was studying in archaeology and hearing all this. It's way before Byzantium, like 9,000.
Yeah.
But it doesn't surprise me. And then it's a feeling in Sultanahmet is not something that you can feel really. And just to give you an idea, the Yerebatan Sarnıcı system, and years and years ago, it was filled with water, and
Mm.
there was only one way to visit it, with a boat.
Yes.
So that was really a fun story for us, because you're going under the ground with a boat. It was a very unique experience for us. It was dark.
Mm.
It, I'll be honest with you, it was a little dirty. Uh, but it was a different feeling. It's really interesting
Yeah.
story.
Mm.
And I'm looking at all the whole discussions, and I know we all have great stories in Istanbul, but if you notice your last decade, even more than a decade, you have been in Istanbul. Do you see changes? Like it may not have to be really positive, but sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Do you feel changes in Istanbul?
Uh, yes, it's a lot less relaxed than it used to be in terms of it's not so much that the population's grown, but it's what's happening to the people who live here. As a resident, I'm aware of just how hard life has become for many people. I mean, you have to buy your water here because you can't drink the tap water. Sometimes it's because the pipes are awful, but generally it's the water because it's very heavily chlorinated. And, every 2 weeks the water goes up, and not a lot, but the minimum wage is about 22,000 lira a month. I'm not sure what that is in US dollars, but it's not much.
Mhm.
A rent on a 3+1, like a salon and 3 bedrooms, is around, like where I live, is around, I believe, 40,000 lira, so more than double the minimum wage. Um, and the economy is not doing very well. Inflation is apparently under control, like getting less, but it's still running at about 40%, which is very high. And the cost of living has soared enormously. Not just that, Turkey produces a lot of things and grows a lot of things, but wages, insurance, all that goes up. And so low income earners really struggle enormously. And it's challenging the social fabric because the divisions between the haves and have nots has just become much wider. And I think people are feeling frustrated, and they're very, like, Turkish people to me have always been very emotional. So I never know, like, I don't watch much Turkish miniseries because frankly I can never understand whether the screaming is because someone's broken a nail or the screaming is because someone is dying. I mean, I'm being facile, but it's true. I can't. People are quite sort of erupt, and that's become a lot worse now. When, like, if there's a car accident, it's always very sort of a lot of sort of anger. But these days, people are a bit quicker to take offence, a little less understanding of one another. It's still a lot better than other countries, but I won't say, like, I still feel really safe. But then I'm sensible. I don't go down dark streets. I don't accept drinks from strangers, and I've learned enough Turkish to know that, and enough about the culture to know that, for example, when you buy simit, a lot of foreign women say, "Oh, and the simit sellers, the men, they're so nice and really friendly." You shouldn't be too friendly. You can be polite, but the smiling is taken for something else. And if you're looking for that, great. But if not, just tone it down. And so, in that sense, there's also a lot more desperate people. So I've heard in tourism, prices are getting, expectations are unrealistic, and tourists are feeling like they're being taken advantage of. And I think that's a shame because people won't come. And, they say that if you have a complaint, if you've got to have good service, you'll tell one person. If you've had bad service, you'll tell five. So those sort of things can really seriously impact on tourism in the future.
Right. Before we close up, like one last question about Istanbul. If you had a chance, like I know you know a lot about Istanbul, you know a lot about tourism and hospitality, and sometimes it's really great. That's why I like to do this series to have someone look at Istanbul from outside. And sometimes people, even myself, I look better when I'm not in Istanbul. Um,
Mm.
if you had a chance to shape the future of Istanbul, what would you preserve and what would you improve in Istanbul?
Okay. One of the things I would preserve is in the last decade or so, there's been a real can-do attitude when it comes to improving public transport. Because I'm a child of public transport from Sydney. It's a small city, and in Istanbul, you don't want to drive. And I also know, I mean, you can if you're mad, but for tourism, you don't need to. But I also know that people who use public transport are more likely to go off the beaten track. They're more likely to see something, make a note, pop back. to interact. People who come on package tours and organized tours go where their guide takes them. They only see what's been decided for them, and that's good because they'll have a lot of positive experiences. But they won't get the chance to meet a wider range of people. And I also think it's good for the city for more, like whenever people meet me, because I speak Turkish, I'm able to show them this is what a foreigner is like, you know. This is what foreign, like not all foreign women are like the ones in little bikinis that you see on television, because there's a lot of misconceptions. So we've had new buses, trams, trains, and a lot more ferry services. So I'd like to see a lot more of that because it's a great city to explore on the water. And the other thing I would like to see is more emphasis on the less well known. Like you mentioned earlier, 10 things to see, $10, whatever. And they always, I mean, I've done it myself. You do need to go to the main sites in Sultanahmet, but they are not all there is. For example, Fatih Mosque, Eyüp Sultan Mosque, Büyük Çamlıca Mosque, which is new but with a really fascinating history. There are marvelous mosques to see. There are bridges built. There's a bridge built by Mimar Sinan that I'm off to see in a few days. There's another mosque in Üsküdar that has a plane tree purportedly planted by Mimar Sinan himself 500 years ago, and I've seen it. It's fairly dead, but it's all like preserved, and it's extraordinary to think. I mean, I'm from a country like America, 200 years old, so you're touching something that was alive and planted all that time ago. And so I would like to see the Ministry of Tourism and Istanbul Büyükşehir Belediye, the municipality, the governor, and all the different departments work together to focus on lesser known places, and well as like thematic guides. For example, the Balyan family, they're an Armenian family who designed Dolmabahce Palace, the Kazra at, which one is it? Ilhamur Kazra in Beşiktaş. A Kazra is a summer pavilion. So do thematic tours so that someone with a fascination for architecture can see not just Ottoman, but also the Balyan, the Turkish national architecture, or minority histories like your grandfathers or great-grandfathers. Go and say, for example, if you go to Namannahan, which is on İstiklal Caddesi, it began as the Russian embassy. The land was actually owned by Russia, which kind of I find strange, like that another country can own land, but they did. And then during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were a lot of artists, photographers, poets, writers, Turkish, Greek, Armenian, living there. And these are important histories. And the more depth there is to tourism, the more people want to come back. At the moment, people only stay about 3 days and then they say, I've done Istanbul, as though it's a chore or a list. And visiting somewhere should never be like that. It should be about what can I learn, who can I meet, and the more off the beaten track, as I'm repeating myself, but the more people are open to the possibility of being a different person in an unfamiliar place, the more chance they have to learn and grow and to take away something positive and also contribute something as well.
Right, right. I really have the same idea, and we try to tell the students like if you are visiting a city or any kind of destination, if you're coming back the same, consider that that wasn't a trip. We
Yeah.
all we always look. I try to explain in their jargon, and I tell them if you are still using this same version of you. Uh, it's not a visit for me. You should come back updated. It's good actually to leave something and take something. It's not really a trip if you're coming back as you are. And I always tell my
Mm.
students, go outside. It doesn't have to be Istanbul, outside of the United States, and you will come back with a different person, and this will change your life. And that's what I hear
Mm.
from my students a lot. I will give you the last question, and this is more than a question. I want to give you an opportunity if you want to say anything that we didn't cover about Istanbul or Istanbul's culture, and or any recommendations. It doesn't have to be students, but anybody who wants to come to Istanbul or especially learn about the culture. Anything that I missed or you would like to say or add,
Um, I think, without sounding self-serving, but again to what you said, a lot of people who come, I've noticed a trend with travel generally, that people pick a destination, buy their tickets, book their hotel, book their tour, and then say, hey, what is it about? It really pays to do some research beforehand to get a sense of what the options are, what you're going to see, what you could choose from. And in doing that, um, the internet, like social media, has really opened up a lot of space and places for different voices. But the problem is that vlogger, that influencer, that person who has a blog and has been once, will often not have the training or perception to understand that what they say is the truth is just what they saw or experienced. I'm a sociologist by training, and you have to say, is this an individual behavior or is this a pattern? And Istanbul and Turkey are very varied. There's a lot of possible ways of describing it and of understanding it. And so if you read about someone's experiences who's just been there on for a holiday, you don't really get the sense of, well, what did you like about the city? Because people bandy around, oh, it's amazing, it's awesome, it's incredible, but that's all very meaningless, because why is it like that? And the other thing too is, and I know this from my experience, I read a lot of Turkish websites to the best of my abilities, and there's some great ones, but they're in Turkish. And they're wonderful because they're for people who live here, aimed at Turkish people wanting to explore their own country more. But when you're born somewhere, you're less likely to notice the things that a foreigner will find strange or different, because to you it just is that way. And so that's one of the things I like to do. I like to point out what is unusual and what is different, so that when people go away, they're familiar with those things. Like they notice them. They think, wow, that's unusual, that's odd. And not just like, Istanbul is much more than just buildings. Okay, it is much more than things and objects and history. It's a living, breathing place. So when you do come, don't just stick to the safe places. Like, Istanbul's pretty safe, but don't just stick to Sultanahmet. Don't just go to Taksim, because basically no one from Istanbul goes to Taksim anymore, because it doesn't feel like home. It's very foreign and alien. Go to places where the little restaurants, the little cafe places, um, chat to someone, even if they don't have much English. A lot of people speak French. Some of them speak Greek. People speak Italian. You'll be quite surprised at the range of languages, and it's not just the young. So look for the things that are different, and then ask about them. Don't just photograph them as well, because people are not objects. They're alive. And so ask for their permission. See if they say no, respect that. But if you do, they might say, well, where are you from? And you get into a conversation and you might learn something quite unexpected, and it'll be the highlight of your day. So I suppose I'm just saying, stay open to possibility, come with an open heart, open mind, forget any preconceptions you have, and don't have any expectations, and you'll have a wild time in a very good way.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience, your Istanbul. Thank you for sharing your Istanbul, and help to shape our students or viewers' experience about Istanbul. And it's not about Istanbul, it's about themselves too. And I know when you come to Istanbul, I'm sure whoever you are, whatever you do, you will find something about yourself in the Istanbul. That's the way I feel it. And I love to talk about Istanbul, especially people like you who can teach me something about the Istanbul. And thank you for being part of this wonderful mosaic.
Oh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.